Hi. Recently I've been thinking about creating a new intro sequence for my online videos. So you will have just watched the first 10 seconds of this particular video where you've seen the swirling letters come in. That's the intro sequence that I use currently as a sort of branding idea for the channel. I want to embellish that, add to it, add a little bit more content to it, make it a little bit more dynamic. It occurred to me, if I'm going to do that, why not actually show a short series of videos where you can actually sit along with me and watch me making the new version of the intro sequence. And so this is what I'm going to do now. So this is going to be a short series of 3 videos I'm going to do. So in video number 1, which is this one, I'm going to actually go through and show you the current 10-second clip, how it was made, some of the things that went in there to go and create it, and then we'll move on to part 2. And in part 2 I will go and create some additional content to stretch this clip out from 10 seconds to 20 seconds and put some features in there. And then in part 3 I'm actually going to go away and create a short piece of audio to sit alongside the video and finish it off, and then any few final little bits of effects, and at the end of part 3 we'll show the final reveal. So it'll be interesting to have you along for the ride as I try and make it. Let's jump into part 1 now and look at the existing 10-second clip that I've got, and let me show you how that was originally created. We have now. So the first one I'm doing is I'm just going to show you a little program here, and this is a program called DaVinci Resolve. As you can see from what's currently being on screen, I actually run this in a dual screen format. A very good reason for me doing that is just the fact that there is a lot of content within the workspaces, and so it's easier to have this spread across 2 screens. Now, an interesting point to mention with DaVinci Resolve is that it actually can be obtained as a piece of free software, and that's how I use it, as free software. It's a very powerful piece of software. However, obviously, as you'd expect in the free version, there is a slight limitation on some of the features and so on. But for most people who are going to create videos at home for amateur sort of content, DaVinci Resolve will probably more than fulfill your needs. Now, I've been using the program for about 2.5 to 3 years now, and it's been pretty much under the radar in amateur video circles. However, in recent times I have noticed on YouTube and other social media platforms there seems to have been quite an increase in content talking about Resolve. So if you're interested in looking for video editing software to use at home, and you've got a little bit of technical skill and you want something that's reasonably powerful but isn't going to cost you anything, I would go and check some of those videos out, go and see what it can do, and I'll also put a link in the description so that you can actually go to the website and look at downloading it and trying it out for yourselves. So as we start to look at how I made the original opening sequence, there are a few parts of the screens within DaVinci Resolve that I'm actually going to want to focus on. So the first one I want to show you is this area here, and this is your main video screen. A lot of video editors will be familiar with having this dual screen format in here. I edit in a single screen, that's the way I happen to like it. And below here you've got your timeline, which has got a list of all the tracks in there that you're using within your current composition. Now, on the left of the main screen you have what is called the inspector, and this basically just shows you some of the primary settings for the particular track you're working with at that point in time. And this is where you'll make adjustments to zoom in and out of things, change the positions on the screen, to crop them, to rescale them, and do all sorts of other things. You can also change the opacity level of the video, and also things like the audio level if you've got an audio track accompanying the piece of video that you're working with as well. Here we have a source that shows us all of the different components that are making up the overall video, and this is where you actually drag some of these things in to your main timeline to go and work with. And down here you can also see something that will be quite useful and common to a lot of people who are editing videos, so you can see where each of your source clips comes in and out, what the recording sections are, what they're called, and other little bits you'd want in there. And also we just have a mixer panel here as well, so we can actually do all the audio mixing, although there is actually a specialist part called Fairlight within DaVinci Resolve. It actually allows you to go in and do some proper audio editing. There's the link to Fairlight down there. So let's start talking about the original video that we put together. One of the most dramatic effects is having each of these letters that make up the logo working their way around the screen into one final part. A bit of overcolour in there, the presents bit comes in, and then the lightning strike comes down. And there is actually here, I've got the audio turned off on the clip at the moment, but down the bottom here we have got a thunderclap that goes with that lightning strike as well. Now as we move backwards and forwards through the animation, we'll see that obviously all of the letters that make up the logo need to end up in their final position at the same time. So it probably won't come as any surprise to people when they actually realise that the animation bit was done backwards. So we start with this point here and then actually worked backwards in time for each of the letters in there to go to their starting point. I'm just going to pick a couple of the letters that exist in there. So if we go down the list of the different tracks that make up the bits, you can see each of the letters actually has its own individual track in here, and it's an individual component. Now to generate each of these individual tracks and make sure the letters are in the right place, what I actually did was put another version of the logo underneath as a solid image, and then create each individual letter that makes up the logo over the top of it, so that I can position each one for its endpoint in the correct place on the screen. So let's just take a look at two of the letters that make up the wording here and see how they interact together. So I'm just going to pick the letter T here. So this last T in the word bits. There is a way of setting within the videos where something needs to be and what its actual attributes will be at a particular point in time. And we do that in the inspector here. In here, you'll see there is a little row of dots. So just let me expand that out a little bit so you can see a little bit closer what I'm referring to. But we have these points here. So for all of the different controls that you have over a particular video file or a particular clip, you can specify for each of these settings a particular point in time and lock a particular value to that point in time. So if I use this arrow here and go backwards, we'll now suddenly see that these elements here have turned red, and that means that at this particular keyframe in the overall video, these settings are set to these particular values. This is what I've defined for them. So this is the end point when the letter T actually ends up back in its final position. So the letter T will end up on here, and at that particular point in time I have the zoom set at 1 because it's a full size, the opacity is 100% because we want to see the letter clearly, and its final position is set as well. All I actually had to do for any of the letters in here is decide where they were going to start from, where they were going to finish, and what sort of effect they were going to apply during that transition. So for the letter T here, if we focus on this letter T in the word bits, we can see that actually it zooms away a little bit and then disappears off the screen altogether, very faintly towards the bottom there. Fairly simple sort of animation. If I go to click on this left arrow again at this point, I can go back to the start setting for the letter T. Now just one other important thing to note here, as you look at these individual tracks that make up each of the letters and each of the effects, you'll see they are of different lengths, and that is of course because what we've actually avoided and what you will have seen in the animation is that not all the letters appear on screen at the same time. So again, if we just go back through here, we can see that by the time we get to quite early in the sequence, there is only a small handful of the letters that make up the logo actually visible, and as we move through time, more become visible, more appear, and more animations take place. So going back to our letter T again, we'll just go back to our final point we ended up here, which is where we had these settings, its final resting place. And all I've actually done in here, if I click on its left arrow, this will take us back to the start point of where the letter T would actually first start to come through for the video sequence. And again, if I just zoom into the inspector at this point, we can actually see at its start point, its opacity is set to 0. Hence the reason why when we switch back to the screen in a moment, and we go back to here, there is no sign of the letter T. And now we know from what we saw in the previous animation, it actually came from down here somewhere. If we look at the position settings for it, you see these position settings actually define its X and Y coordinates, which is actually somewhere down here on the screen. And you can also see its zoom is set to 0 as well. All I've done as part of actually creating the movement for the letter T is to set that start point and the end point. However, if we start to move through the sequence, I'll bring you back into the full screen so we can see the letter itself. There's letter T just starting to appear at this point now. Just about to see it. If we just go back to have a look at the inspector and see what it's doing at this point, it's got an opacity set at 16.09, so just over 16%. You can see in zoom terms it's come from 0, so it's just starting to appear and get increased in size, and these position values will change here. So I'm actually in the screen just going to move forward a few frames, and you'll see those values as I move through the keyframes will start to change. And if we switch back to looking at the whole screen, again we can focus on the letter T here. It's now bigger and more visible, and again as those values start to change it also transforms into its final values at the end of that sequence. One other letter we're going to look at in here, I'm just going to look at the letter I next to it. Letter I actually starts slightly earlier in the overall title sequence. It also just has a slightly bit more of a dramatic movement. And you see, so the letter I, not only does that move its position, but it also rotates as well. And so all we've done in this particular case for the letter I is we've set a rotation angle in here. So at the end of the sequence, it's at a rotation angle of 0 because it's upright. And at the very start of the sequence, its rotation angle is minus 317.29 degrees. And so again, when I switch back to the full screen and I move through the sequence, we can see the letter I starts to appear, and it actually appears all the way up here, look, and then comes all the way down in a swirl, goes all the way around, and finally ends up in that particular location there. And those values, again, if you're looking at the inspector on the right hand side of the screen there, we can see those values as they start to change. And the same effect has been applied to each of the letters, making up the title sequence here, and so they all have a different values assigned, and so therefore each one does a slightly different animation. And what I did to get them all together in the end was literally just go through each one letter at a time and just try out some different values in the inspector for the transformation section, just to see how each particular letter evolved through the sequence until I came up with something that I was happy with. You want to try and make sure there's a fairly uniform sort of spread across the screen, so nothing was clustered in one particular place. And now again, as part of this sequence, as I move backwards and forwards through here, we'll see that they also turn a blue colour. Now literally all that is applying, and I say that's all it is, but that's all it is applying a solid colour of blue. The difference here is it actually has a certain amount of cropping applied. So in here, rather than applying it across the whole screen, we've actually cropped it so it only comes down to around this level here. And then all that happens is with the opacity layer in here, the opacity layer comes up, and in here there's actually three key points. So if I move forward to the first key point, start here where there is no blue colour applied and the opacity is set to 0, and then we move forward to a midpoint in the blue setting where it's at 100% and the letters have all now turned blue. And then there's actually an end point here as well where we go forwards and we come to opacity back to 0 again. So the blue comes in and fades back out. So letters in place, gets blue, and then switches all the way back to white again at the end here. We also have the lightning strike, which you've just seen, that comes down from the screen here. Now again, the lightning strike is sort of animated, but in actual fact this whole image here that makes up the lightning strike is just one PNG image, so it's actually added as an individual image. What we actually do here, and this is quite dramatic, is as we move through the lightning strike, we actually get start points and end points for cropping the animation. So we go right to the very start of the sequence where the lightning first appears. So everything is actually cropped out. And then as we move forward through time, we actually define where we want to end up with at the midpoint, when the whole of the animation is available, and then where we want to end up at the end point when the lightning strike is gone. Now, if we actually look at the values through there, and we just move forward right back to this start point in here, you'll see all we're doing with the cropping is literally allowing more and more of that lining image to be displayed, and then to give the effect of it coming back down to earth, we then just start to fade out the top piece, and that's it. And then just to add a bit more effect to it, we also have another solid color added in here, which has a high level of softness applied to it. So again, it's essentially initially a square box applied in there as just a solid block of color, but then cropped down, so it only occupies this part of the screen here, and then it's got a high level of softness being applied as well, and those values will go through. And all we're doing there again is we're changing the opacity in there to make sure that it appears, becomes visible on the screen, and goes away again. And that just looks like the lightning has made contact with the letter S in the word presents, just made the screen glow around where it struck. And of course, even the word present itself is just a single word in there. And again, as most of you have probably done when you've done videos yourself, those who have done some editing, it's a single layer in there with the word presents. And again, with any of these things, if I just go into the inspector, you'll see these values up here will change depending on what you're using. So if you've got a video clip, you would have video here and audio on the right. In this particular case, it's an actual text clip I've put in there, it's just a text layer that's added. Then we can also define how that works as an actual video sequence, that particular piece of writing as well. So again, as per any of the other parts in there, all we've literally done at this point is to go in and define where we want this to go and start from. So this point here in our sequence, in our timeline, the lettering can't be seen because it has an opacity of 0 right the way from the start right up to this point here. And then we just move forward to say, actually at this point we want it to be totally visible. And then what we actually sink into is we've then got the point of this timeline here where actually this 0 point here where this is at 100%, but then we actually want everything to fade out as one particular sequence at the end. As you can see there, the opacity is dropped to 0 for all points. So now the last thing we did is just to add an audio clip, a nice clap of thunder that will go with the lightning in there. Now, two things we could do at this point. We could simply start to add more content to what we have here, but I actually want this particular clip as we have it currently to actually appear at the end of the sequence still. And so I could import some more content and move it to the very front of the timeline here and add some more layers to it. But because I actually don't want to make any changes to this particular piece, I only want to add to it, the easier way to work is to take the final video that was created with all of this content in and then add to that instead. Whenever you make any of these videos, you've got all these different tracks and so on in here, and one of the final pieces you'll go and do is to go in and then actually render that image. So that's how I got to create the original intro piece that I use for my video projects. Okay, so that's the end of part one in this series, showing the original clip that I currently use. And so I hope you'll join me in part two when I will move on to adding some additional content to that original clip. So you can either click on the link up here, which will take you to part two, or again I'll put a link in the description below, which you can follow. And I hope to see you in the next video.